Welcome into this week's episode of Cape Codcast. I'm your host, Emma Carman. We are so excited to welcome Geoff Pontes on for today's episode. Geoff is a prospect writer with Baseball America and helps cover the Cape Cod Baseball League. Geoff, thanks so much for coming on today. How are you doing?
Doing great. Baseball's fully underway, so that makes me happy, obviously, as a baseball writer, but just somebody who lives and breathes the game. And every day we're a little bit closer to the start of the 2022 Cape Cod League. So every day I'm a little bit better.
Exactly. Already mid-April, time's flying. So, you have a kind of a personal connection to the Cape League. You grew up over the bridge. You came to a bunch of games as a kid, kind of call it your definition of heaven. What impact did the Cape League have on you growing up?
Yeah, I think, it's funny because I don't think I fully appreciated what the Cape Cod League was until I was an adult. And I think that's probably common for a lot of people who grow up in the area because you don't expect there to be like this level of baseball kind of in your backyard. Especially being in a cold weather state, we got to play other sports in the winter. We got to go inside. We're playing hockey, we're playing basketball, anything that, of course, hockey's cold, but at the same time, we can't really, especially when I'm 40 years old. So a lot of the indoor training facilities hadn't opened yet. That revolution really started kind of after my generation. So it wasn't something I think I was cognizant of. And I had friends who, had played high school ball alongside myself that had played in the Cape Cod League, actually. And I can remember, going to games there, local guys from the area that had played in the Cape. Even just coaches, people like that. It was like this mythical thing that people talked about. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it was until I was probably an adult that I started to realize wow, I saw Frank Thomas when I was a kid, play for Orleans, mm-hmm. or, so-and-so. And then you start to make the connection of every year when you go to a game, there's potentially 9 to 10 major leaguers on the field mm-hmm. at any point in time, which is a silly concept, I think, to even if you're going to minor league games all the time, even if you're going to SEC games all the time, and you're seeing the highest levels of, non-major league baseball, you don't see that very often. I mean, I was at a game a couple years ago, opening the season in Wareham, and Andrew Vaughn, Bryson Stott, both major leaguers, were on the field. Spencer Torkelson was a freshman. He was playing for Chatham. Alec Manoah was pitching for Chatham. And there were a bunch of other prospects, Greg Jones, Bryant Packard, other guys that were on those rosters for each squad, guys that we may look back in 10 years and say, oh, there's another major leaguer. There's another major leaguer. And then let's go to the next part of it. The games are free. You're not paying an arm and a leg for concessions. And I have 3 kids. So and they want to go to Cape games because it's a different environment. Mm-hmm. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit. But, I can go to a game at YD, or I can go to a game in Orleans or Chatham or, Katuitt, Lowell Park, one of my favorite places on earth. And I don't spend $70 on concessions, they can get a t-shirt or something. And beyond that, it's free to walk in. You obviously make your donations. I always do. But they're getting memories. They're seeing great players. They're up and close to the game. And I just feel like the whole experience in the Cape mm-hmm. is very different from anything else that you see at this point in baseball, because the game itself has been, and for good reason, has become so corporate. So many things are controlled by the gate, what they can get out of you, for money when you're there. And you get to see guys really making their futures. I mean, there are a lot of players that come from mid-majors, non-Division I schools that go to the Cape Cod League mm-hmm. and make a name for themselves. This year was really interesting because you had guys like an Adam Mayer with Yarmouth Dennis, that was from the University of British Columbia. That's an NAIA school. Mm-hmm. He's now at Oregon. I think he ended up getting injured, but there was a lot of buzz the first month of the season about Mayer and potentially where he could end up. There were a bunch of different schools that were rumored. Mm-hmm. And that guy firmly went from a no-name. Nobody knew who that guy was June 1st, at least in terms of the public consciousness. Baseball people obviously are a step ahead. But, I didn't know who Adam Mayer was, and I follow the draft. I follow all that, and then he comes out. I saw him 2 or 3 times over the first couple of weeks, and it's like, all right, look at the slider, you look at the fastball, the changeup. All right, there's something here, and fast forward, 6 months later, and he's in the top 50, top 60, 70 on draft lists. You don't get that experience anywhere else. I feel. So it was a long rambling explanation.
No, that's
I
great.
could talk about the Cape all day.
So talking about, all those players, so much talent, who are some of your favorite players kind of growing up that made that impact on you?
Yeah, I think, the big one that I mentioned was Frank Thomas, who was a big one. Obviously, seeing him on a baseball field when you're that young, as big as he was, I mean, because he was a defensive end, and this is before sort of, the steroid era and guys got humongous. He was so much bigger than life, and just the power that he had when he made contact with the baseball. That's certainly one that kind of sticks out in my mind. But a lot of them, honestly, are people that didn't make the major leagues, that were coaches and friends of my family, stuff like that. Like I can remember my father's partner, this guy Chris Frager, who was an attorney. My father was an attorney in Taunton, and he played in the Cape. And I can remember as a kid going to see the Pawtucket Red Sox and going to see like Mo Vaughn, etc. This is like a million years ago, and like he knew players on each team because there were guys that he had played with like 2 years earlier on the Cape. So I think for me, that was the connection, that it was like a guy that was from my hometown that I knew could, play alongside some guys that potentially became major league superstars, some of them Hall of Famers. So, I think that's the thing that makes the Cape unique, because it's still there. There's still local guys every year that break through on the Cape and, are part-time players early, play well enough, and maybe they don't get to the majors. Maybe they don't even get to play in the minor leagues, or if they do, they wash out within a year. But they have that summer on the Cape where they get to play alongside these guys and hit 300. And you see it all the time. So I think, that those are the guys that kind of stick out for me. Like even recently, it's like Max Triani, who I think was a Bentley player and Division III, ended up playing at UNC last year. And a lot of that was because of his 2019 Cape. Like, I think he hit like 300 something, made the All-Star game. And whether he's an accountant or a professional baseball player or coach or whatever, he has those memories and you can't take that away from him. And I think that's what's really fun about the Cape, is following some of those stories. And every team, has 25 to 30 stories.
Yeah, exactly. And I've talked to a bunch of different players, some that are in the minors, some that are in the majors now. Obviously, they mentioned their summers are the best summers of their life, the fastest 3 months too. But for your aspect, what were some of your favorite kind of memories or stories that you had going to games?
Yeah, I think my favorite story, and it's fresh in my mind, were 2 particular players from last summer. So I was covering the Cape Cod League actually before I moved over to Baseball America. I'm still at Prospects Live. I'm really close with the guys at Perfect Game and the guys that do the college coverage for Perfect Game. So they were nice enough to pay me to cover the Cape Cod League last summer for Perfect Game and PG College Ball. So I went to like 30 plus games, and one of my supervisors at Perfect Game is a hitting coach for Jared Goodwin, who's a hitting coach for a number of major leaguers. Ryan Mountcastle, one in particular, a lot of big prospects. Riley Green's kind of one of his guys, who's soon to be a major leaguer, but also Brock Wilkin. And so I met Brock very early, and because we had that personal connection, the conversations were much easier initially. And I think anyone that's done any kind of journalism, when you have to go up and talk to players, it's not always comfortable at first, because you don't know what their personalities are like. And I got to know Brock really well, and he's just such a good guy, somebody who cares a lot about the game and being better, and somebody that has a lot of insights just into the players he plays with, the guys that he plays against, but also seeing him go from a standout freshman at Wake Forest to, and honestly, he was part of that 2020 draft class where those guys, high school wise,
Mhm.
where maybe he gets $1 million if there's no pandemic, if there's no shutdown, he has a full high school season, scouts can get out to see him. Maybe he goes in the third round in an overslot. So he lost some of those opportunities, but to see him go onto the Cape and then he's as good of a freshman as there's ever been on the Cape Cod League. Like that, I think people forget that. Like that was unprecedented.
Mhm.
Another one was Chase DeLauder, who was a virtual unknown, another small school guy, James Madison. By the end of the Cape, he had as much buzz as any Power Five guy that had played in the league.
Mhm.
And then the last one, and I've interviewed him a couple of times, and I just think that he is a fascinating personality and mind for the game. That's Bryce Hubbard from Brewster.
Mhm.
Um, if you've had an opportunity to talk to Bryce about pitching and how he approaches pitching, it's very different from a lot of other guys. There's an element of, just gamesmanship and sort of study and science that go into it with him that I think even in this age of data, he still stands out. This is a guy that would, in the middle of games he wasn't pitching in, go into the scouting section and, just get data off of the TrackMan on a particular pitcher for an inning, just to know, like, what's this guy doing? How is he doing something different? Okay, like I could kind of see this, and then kind of talk about it. And the way he talks about the game is so different from other people, that I learned a lot just from conversations with him. And then if you go out and you watch him pitch, he's so competitive, he's so fiery that you would never think he was this kind of soft-spoken, analytical guy off the field. And I think the combination of those two and just watching him defy odds is something that I'm going to really enjoy over the next couple of years, because he's not going to be a guy that probably goes in the top 10 picks of this draft, even if I think he should, for a bunch of reasons. But I think he's going to be a guy we look back in 3 years and go, why wasn't that guy a top 10 pick? And there's all these signs that you can see. And if it doesn't work out the way I think it's going to, even then, I think that, it's clear to see that a guy like that put his all. And maybe being a little bit closer to it this year, I have more insight, but I think those three guys really stick out for me. Some
Mhm.
of it being the personal relationship side of things, but also just how unbelievably focused and talented, and also like coming from somewhat obscurity, I think, for a lot of these guys,
Mhm.
to what being good on the Cape means, publicly, but also, in the back rooms and decision rooms for major league teams.
Yeah. So looking ahead to this summer's MLB draft, I have to ask, which prospects do you think from last summer that you saw on the Cape stand out? I know you mentioned a few, but kind of where do you see those players being placed for this upcoming draft?
Oof. um, yeah, I think you're gonna see DeLauder still go pretty high. Um, Brooks Lee, I don't think there's much question he's going to be a top 5 pick. There's a chance he's 1-1. He's a guy that certainly stands out. Um, there were others too, just in terms of a guy like Louis Ramirez, who I think was a little bit under the radar on the Cape, came out, looked really good. He's probably going to be a top 5 round guy. I haven't talked to a bunch. I'm mostly working the pro beat at this moment, but um, I'm sure if you talk to folks that are decision makers, he's within that conversation. Um, Other guys, there's so many on every single roster. Clark Elliott, I think, really cemented himself as a potential option for teams in the first few rounds,
Mhm.
just based on how he performed last summer. Tyler Locklear from VCU was another one that maybe he, at least on the Cape, played second fiddle to Chase DeLauder a little bit, but I think people could see, like, all right, what the bat could do. He's incredibly talented. I think Eric Brown from Katuitt is one. Ryan Ritter is another. Those guys are all like top 5 round guys. Talked about Adam Mayer already. I think, regardless of how the injury sort of plays out, I still think he's the type of arm in this draft that's going to go in the top 3 rounds.
Mhm.
But if you go through every single roster, there's probably 6 or 7 guys on each team that are going to get drafted. Maybe the averages, average out a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But I'm just even thinking more like Max Ramiro Jr. from Chatham last year is probably going to go pretty high in the draft. And maybe these guys aren't first round picks, but that doesn't matter in baseball. Really good players come from the entirety of the draft.
Mhm.
But really, I think you have to look at it from the perspective of like top 5 round guys, top 5 round money.
Mhm.
And, there's probably going to be 30 guys. And that was what's cool about sort of the way things changed last year with the later draft.
Mhm.
Um, you had this sort of early period within the Cape Cod League that was like the pre-draft period where there were a lot of guys, Evan Shaver being one, but there were several others that came out here, made a couple of starts if they're a pitcher, maybe 2 or 3 starts, shut it down, and then ended up getting drafted. There were a bunch of hitters as well. A lot of Ivy League guys last year that got drafted. I think Ben Rice from Katuitt being one, who really was loud early on, ended up, I think getting drafted by the Yankees in the later rounds.
Mhm.
Austin Vernon from Chatham looked like a much different pitcher from the guy I had seen in 2019. I think he went in the 11th round of the Rays. You're going to see more of that this year. And I think it makes it exciting because some of these teams, like Katuitt, lost 9 players. They completely reworked their roster in a few days, and they were in the playoffs. And they, won a game in a series against, Bourne, who was probably the best team in the Cape up until the end, where Brewster obviously won the title. But like, there's a lot of different things that are at play now. You may see more players now that go into pro ball than ever before, because now it's almost like a 1-month showcase before the draft for a lot of these guys. And, they're playing with more passion and pride just for themselves because the opportunities in their hand and how well they perform here could create more opportunities for them.
So you mentioned obviously tons of people from the Cape. Now you're kind of more on the pro beat side of things. So out of all the MLB rookies who are former CCBL alum, who do you like most long term? I know you mentioned Torkelson, Bryson Stott, Joey Bart. Kind of who in your realm do you think is gonna make the biggest impact one day down the road?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Torkelson. He struggled a little bit early on here, but that's kind of how Torque is. I feel like he always struggles, at least the last couple of years, and then just gets in a groove. He starts seeing beach balls, and it's just a laser show. So I don't think there's going to be any concerns there long term. And I think he's a middle of the order bat. So the guys that I've seen recently, that are and that are rookies, I think it's probably him. Stephen Kwan, there's a bunch of others that are great stories. But I think in particular, Torkelson is one that stands out for me where it's like, yeah, last year it would have been Manoah. This year it's Torque. I mean, just top of the scale kind of players, potential superstars.
Mhm. So what do you think, the CCBL, obviously there's so many other summer collegiate leagues, whether it's the Futures Collegiate Baseball League, the NECBL. From a scouting perspective, what do you think separates the Cape League from those other leagues?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good players in all those leagues. Northwoods, the Coastal Plains League,
Mhm.
Florida's state league. I forgot the name of that one. Is maybe the Florida Wooden Bat League. Had
Mhm.
some good players, across the board. West Coast League,
Mhm.
but this is the premier league in terms of depth. Every single roster, as we said before, really from like 1 to like 35, because you have those flux spots with, temporary contracts, guys that leave to go to Team USA, guys that get drafted now. So there's a lot of flux within rosters.
Mhm.
Um, you're going to get the best players here in terms of a concentration.
Mhm.
You're going to get good players. There's always guys that slip through the cracks that maybe don't play in the Cape and play in one of those other leagues and end up getting drafted. And that's awesome. That's why those other leagues exist, and why those leagues are important too. I mean, you see a lot of underclassmen that play in the NECBL or the Futures League or the Northwoods League that the following summer, when it's their draft year, they come to the Cape. And that's what my last point is, and I think it's the most important one, is
Mhm.
this is where players go that don't make Team USA, and there's only a handful that do. This is where they go to play, to showcase their skills and prove that they're among the best. And being good on the Cape is important.
Mhm.
As we said before, there's been guys that have gotten drafted just off of that. So if you want to see the best summer ball in the world, you come and watch the Cape Cod League.
Love it. So you mentioned you're part of the group that founded Prospects Live back in 2018. You kind of helped grow it to the level it currently is. It was first ran by 6 individuals. Now you're kind of more on the Baseball America side. But how did this idea kind of come about, and where did it all begin?
Yeah. So I had been in sales since 2006, around when I got out of college. And I had, between 2010 and 2016, I had 3 kids with my wife. And after my daughter was born, like when you have like one, like your firstborn, like, and you're younger, like you go and you see people, everyone wants to see the baby, you go out and you do things. And then like the second one comes and it's like, I don't want to go out anymore. So, during the summers, I was watching a lot of baseball and I would take the kids to baseball games, all around me. Pawtucket was still in Pawtucket and not in Worcester yet, even though I live about 10 minutes from Worcester. But Lowell was still here. Cape Cod League was going on. There was college baseball. And it was a cheap, easy thing to do where we could go to like the beach during the day, go to a game or whatever. We go on vacation around there. My parents still live in Taunton. So we just go to a lot of baseball games. And, I found myself more intrigued about like writing about it. I was playing a lot of fantasy baseball leagues as well because it kind of filled the time. And the bug kind of bit me. And I started writing for a website called Razzball, which was a fantasy website. I've been around for a while. And it was more of like a zany kind of fun site. So it allowed me kind of do what I wanted to do and have some fun with it. And I wrote about pitchers mostly, and then had the opportunity to write about prospects back in 2015. Once that started, I had a lot of ideas for certain content that was lacking, particularly on like the fantasy space when it came to prospects and minor league coverage and the draft. And I expanded on a lot of that stuff between 2015 and 2018. Built a bit of a following, and I was still, a dad, a coach, a husband, still going through, work and all that every day. But it became much more realistic around 2018. I was like, I want to do something with this, and I want to focus more primarily on evaluation and really telling the stories of players in all levels of baseball, and not just who is the best guy to pick up in your fantasy league. Which, like, there's a time and place for that. And I'm somebody who personally appreciates all types of baseball coverage because you want to have, as many sort of like rivers sort of feeding into the lake, right? Like you'll never run out of water, you never run out of fans. So, I never have an issue with any of that stuff that's out there. I want folks to find different pathways to baseball, and hopefully, they get as crazy about it as I am. But 2018, I had a couple other friends, Jason Panini, Jason Waddell, Lance Brozdowski, Matt Thompson, and Jacobs Wybeck, and we started Prospects Live. And the reason that I had started was I wanted to have my own thing. I wanted to explore these different things and just see what we could build. And we all wanted to get into scouting. We all wanted to get into baseball full time as a career. And it's remarkable looking back when I left in November of 2021 to join Baseball America full time. I quit my sales job after 16 years, and just I do baseball all day now. But looking back, like I'm one of the editors of the Prospect Handbook, a book I've read since I was like in high school. Jason Panini got hired back in 2019 as a complex level scout with the Minnesota Twins. He's still working for him. I think he's on his second contract now. And Jason, excuse me if I'm wrong, and it's not, but I thought it was. Jacobs Wybeck just got hired by the Padres to cover the Arizona backfields. Lance Brozdowski is on the broadcast for marquee television for the Chicago Cubs. Matt is still one of the owners of Prospects Live, and Jason Waddell, stepped aside, but still one of the most, passionate and insightful baseball people I've ever met. But we had a bunch of people that have worked for us that have gone on to work for teams and worked for, sports agencies and everything else. And it's crazy to think that just a bunch of friends in a group text chatting about baseball turned into that and changed our lives. So that's the thing about Prospects Live for me that I can't believe that it turned into what it turned into. And it's still not like this huge, like, media juggernaut or anything like that. But, we filled a niche, and I think we brought in a lot of fantasy people into real baseball coverage and maybe put a little bit more shine on the draft and some other things that people had a passion for and just maybe didn't realize it. Because I always think that that's what separates people. It's not looking at the data and seeing what everybody can see, right? And this is like all types of business, everything. It's looking at something that nobody's talking about and can't quantify and saying, I bet if you did this, this would happen. That's the way it is with scouting. That's the way it is with baseball. And I think that's what's happening in the Cape Cod League, right? To tie it back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Scouts are seeing things in players that other people can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what it was. We created something, and we created a marketplace that I think hadn't fully been sort of paid attention to and cultivated. And I think now, 3 years later, there's a lot more passion for prospects, minor league players, college baseball, the draft than ever before. And it's funny to say this, but in some ways, I think it was the 2020 is how everything stopped, that we had to find other things to talk about
Mm-hmm.
when it came to content. And a lot of times we went back to college and prep and the draft because it was the only thing happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like it wasn't just us, I mean, it was everybody. The year following, the last two drafts have been crazy. The amount of content, the amount of coverage, is much bigger than it's ever been. We've had good draft shows on MLB and ESPN. And I think it's good. I think that we're starting to move in a direction where, like college basketball, like college football, where these amateur players have a name, people know who they are, and know why they're so talented, want to see them, want to see the highlights. I think that's great. It's great for everybody in baseball.
Yeah, it makes you think a different way for sure. So from Cape to Prospects Live, now Baseball America, you've obviously experienced working in many different levels, scouting tons of baseball athletes. So now as a prospect writer for Baseball America, what are your tasks that are a little bit different from where you kind of started with Prospects Live and now where you are?
Yeah. Writing articles for a magazine, like an actual printed publication. That's really, really different. And that's not something that I think I had ever anticipated. But I also think it's just the level of detail that goes into everything that we put out there in the review process. It really bugs us if we get something wrong, or if there's a typo, or a player gets traded and you just printed something and you're like, oh man, I have to now go back and change this. But I think the biggest thing that separates Baseball America from other places that I've worked is, and I think it's just the mentality of maybe like a news organization versus a blog, where a blog is very much like your firsthand perspective and biases. And you're very honest about that. Where Baseball America, a lot of it is sourced. Most of what we're putting out there is sourced. So it's cool to get quotes and speak with, scouting directors, scouts, analysts, people in the front office, players, and really get the story from their perspective versus just what I'm seeing with my eyes. And I embrace it. I feel like I've learned so much, and it's changed my perspective on how I view certain things within the game. Maybe it doesn't change my personal opinion, but it makes me think of like the rational sort of argument against what I think. And I think if you understand both sides, that's important. I think it's something that lacks in baseball now. It's something that lacks in just life and interactions with people. That, my father was an attorney, so I kind of grew up in a household where that was the environment, like rational minds can differ. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from Baseball America, where years ago when it was my opinion on a website and someone disagreed with it, I might take offense or it might bother me or whatever, where now it's kind of like, all right, that's interesting. Like, let's talk about that. Like, why do you think that? What are the examples? What's the data? And you can kind of flesh out like, all right, like that makes sense. And you learn a lot more about the game and just how to evaluate things. And I think, if you want to be good at something, you got to be open to different perspectives and changing stuff. So I think that's the biggest thing for me.
No, exactly. And in life, that's a good life lesson for everyone. So for those of you watching or listening, Baseball America is a sports magazine, as Geoff mentioned, that covers baseball at all levels with a main focus kind of on up and coming players in high school, college, minor leagues, and some international level. What have you noticed from a writer perspective, which each of those levels and kind of covering them, that from your perspective of writing?
Yeah. I think that there's different goals
Mhm.
with each sort of level. When you're talking about amateurs, whether it's internationally, whether it's high school players, whether it's college players,
Mhm.
um, and maybe it's a little bit less with older players because like the international thing is wide, right? You could be
Mhm.
talking about 15-year-old kids signing from Venezuela or the Dominican Republic, or you could be talking about 23-year-old professionals that have played 3 or 4 years at the
Mhm.
highest level in Japan, right? There's a big difference between Shohei Ohtani
Mhm.
and Roderick Arias, who just signed with the Yankees at 16, right?
Mhm.
But that being said, it's all a matter of projecting out how they're going to develop their tools into actual tangible skills
Mhm.
in game. It's also about their attitude and who they are as people. Um, I can't necessarily always, go into those details and some of the stuff that you hear, but I think that it's something that's present. How is this guy's personality going to work? I know I just talked to Driveline founder and former pitching coordinator for the Cincinnati Reds, Kyle Boddy. This last week, the podcast just came out. My podcast, 90th percentile with Baseball America.
Mhm. Mhm.
My shameless plug right there.
That was my
But
next question. Going too far, going too
cool.
fast.
But something that he had talked about was he talked about Carson Spires, and Carson Spires is a player who came from a big program, came from a baseball background. His family, his father was a legend, I think at Clemson, and I think uncle played in the majors or whatever. It's a famous family of athletes. He was a walk on at a D1 program, put up really good numbers, but the stuff didn't jump off the page at you. And, it wasn't anything physically or performance wise that got the Reds to sign Carson Spires. It was who Carson Spires was. It was the fact that when he talked to him, like you could tell the kid was focused on getting better, was open, to change things and work on stuff. And, I think that that's another element of the amateur side of things that needs to be measured. And I think that that's what's different sometimes about covering those beats versus covering pro ball and covering the minor leagues. Not that the personalities don't matter as much, but once you're in an organization, they've given you a substantial amount of money that obviously ranges in how much,
Mhm.
um, but it's because they believe in you, and they've already gone through all those processes. So now it's a matter of, can you perform? Can you earn it? And I think that that's so you're a little bit harsher on guys in pro ball if they're not earning it.
Mhm.
Where I think with amateur stuff, there's so much that goes on that you kind of got to weigh that and look at the skills and say, what is this guy's work ethic like? What do the coaches say about him that he's played for? I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but I remember hearing a story about a kid a few drafts ago, a high school kid who struggled his draft summer because he broke up with his girlfriend a week before his draft summer, and it was a really bad breakup. And they had been together for years. And
Mhm.
like, I had been a 17-year-old kid before. I understand what that's like. I think we all can, but we don't think about the fact that it's a 17-year-old kid and he has the most important summer of his life. And
Mhm.
he may not just be feeling it for a couple of weeks, and that could cost him money.
Mhm.
Luckily, this kid went to college, became a star, was an early round draft pick,
Mhm.
and is, I think in the major leagues. So that happens all the time. We don't even think about it, right? So I think that that's the different part of it is there's a lot more of like letting go struggles, but also understanding like who the person is on the amateur side
Mhm.
versus the pro side. Once you get into the pro side, particularly when you get into, high A, double A, you got to perform. You're not going to get those opportunities. There's plenty of guys who signed for millions of dollars that went high in the first round, and then,
Wow.
they weren't good.
Mhm.
It happens.
So you mentioned obviously you have a role of writing for Baseball America, but also now you're hosting a podcast called the 90th Percentile, which dives into kind of the rapidly evolving world of player development, crazy world. So each episode you're speaking with, new people within the game, making an impact on player training, development, kind of their methods when it comes to what they're exactly doing. So, where did this idea come about and how was it all kind of began?
Yeah, I think it was just based in I wanted to learn more about it. So I had traditionally approached everything from like a very sort of scouting focused background prior to the shutdown of 2020. I knew a lot about stats that would show up on like a fan graphs page and how to break down a player's performance, but you don't have all that for anybody really outside the major leagues, at least in the terms of the depth that we have.
Mhm.
And I felt like I needed to learn to evaluate pitchers better. So I worked with a couple of guys that were like 20 years old that were aspiring analysts that worked for us at Prospects Live. And we just had a really open dialogue about data and trying to understand it. So they would send me like two player pitchers data. They'd show me like everything for, their pitch movement, their induced vertical break, their horizontal movement, their spin access, you know, their whiff rates, their strike rates. And I'd have it for like, their fastball, their curveball, their slider, their changeup. And I'd have like two pitchers.
Mhm.
And then they'd be like, break it down. And so I was really wrong early on.
Mhm.
And then by being wrong, I learned about what was right and how to sort of approach it and think differently. Because it's always what you take away. It's not always the end game, but it's like how can I improve my process and make it more streamlined and take in all these different data points to get like an ultimate conclusion. That's really what your goal is. Um, so I took it the next step when I had an opportunity with Baseball America where it's BA, it's Baseball America. People are going to talk to me and we have connections. So I was able to get a lot of smart people. I've had Tom House, who was Tom Brady's throwing coach, Drew Brees' throwing coach. Oh, he's also a major league pitcher, a major league pitching coach. He caught Hank Aaron's home run ball that broke Babe Ruth's record. Like
Oh my
he's like the Forrest Gump of baseball. He's been in
gosh.
every single moment. Like he's gonna have the best baseball movie about his life
Love
because
that.
he's had so many different. But he's my first guest.
Mhm.
I got to talk
Your
to
first
Nicola.
guest.
Yeah,
Insane.
I get to talk to Nicola Dolo. We had Kyle Boddy on this week. I talked to Sean McGrath, who was Elon pitching coach, now Double A pitching coach for the Seattle Mariners. But all these great minds, and really the goal of the podcast was to expand on what I did during the shutdown, which was shut up, listen to smarter people than myself, and then soak up all that information like a sponge, all those lessons,
Mhm.
but also to be able to share that with other people and maybe sort of change how we approach conversations about baseball and change how we approach learning about baseball and just being open to different ideas. Because not every guest that I have agrees with everything that every other guest that I've had on has said, but it goes back to what I was saying before, where it's understanding all the different rationales and why people believe that.
Exactly. So, for the future of this podcast, what are your hopes? Obviously, there's tons and tons of people to interview in regards to their methods and how they do everything, but what are the future hopes for this?
Yeah. Rob Hill, which is a random one from the Dodgers, I just think it's brilliant. I'd really like to pick his brain, talk with him a little bit more. This one might happen shortly, but Jason Olcart from the Phillies, who's another driveline guy, but was their hitting guy. He's been with the Phillies for a few years now. I just find his content on hitting and how he approaches it to be really interesting. I'd like to talk to some major league managers. I mean, as funny as it is, I'd like to talk to like Tony La Russa, like somebody who's publicly flies so in the face of all that, but has been around the game so long,
Mhm.
and just to kind of get his perspective. Like, I think something like that, guys like that, are interesting because you had to adapt at a certain point to something, whatever it was, or what it, or more often than not, I think we forget this. The guys who are old school now were new school before. So they challenged something before. What was it that they challenged?
Mhm.
What's changed since then? I think that's what's really cool about baseball is this new school stuff isn't that new. They're all concepts that have been going on in the game for a long time. We just have a tangible way to measure it now,
Mhm.
and that makes accountability a bigger portion of baseball coaching than it's probably ever been, and an evaluation than it's ever been. It's easier to hold somebody accountable for missing something immediately, but also it's easier to train where we're weak, like because nobody's perfect, right? There might be something that we don't see. It's easier to say, all right, I missed on that. This is why I missed on that. I can go back and I can learn from that. So really, just anybody that can bring that to the table. I'm not against talking to really anybody, but I think another one that would be cool is talking to Nolan Ryan, talking to Walker Bueller,
Mhm.
talking to Clayton Kershaw, guys within the game that have taken some of these methods and turned it into something, or seen a bunch of different things, or maybe tried multiple things.
Mhm.
Somebody who maybe failed a few times and then figured it out.
Yeah.
That would be interesting too. Like Rich Hill from the Red Sox would be interesting. Like Rich Hill was a couple years older than I am, and was a high school player here, and then had this career with the Cubs, and then washed out, was an indie ball, and now he's been back. He had a full second major league career. Like, how did that happen, and
Mhm.
how were you able to kind of put down your own guard, your own biases, and maybe your own ego, and put that aside and rework yourself? I find that to be most interesting, because I had a career change at 40,
Mhm.
so I can relate to that. I think a lot of people can.
Mhm. And obviously, I mean, covering all these people from Cape stuff to Prospects Live to Baseball America. Before we wrap up this episode, do you have any last stories or advice or anything you want to share with any of our listeners or viewers?
Yeah. I think, just go to games, be open to different ideas. And when you're at a Cape game, just appreciate the fact that you are at a Cape game. After 2020, I, I- you know, I can remember I thought about crossing over that bridge for the first time to go to a game for whatever. 18 months or whatever it was, more than a year. And it was like my thing during the early part of the pandemic, where it was like, I think we didn't know, right? But it was
Mhm.
like, oh, once everything's good in June, I'm going to be back going to Cape games,
Uh-huh.
and everything's going to be fine. And then it didn't happen, and you had to wait that whole year. And I can remember talking to one person I become friendly with, my travels in the Cape, Peter Flaherty,
Mhm.
from Katuitt. Is a brilliant kid, young man. Because he's an adult now, right? Met him when he was like 19 on the Cape, and
Oh
now
my gosh.
graduated from college and works for the Yankees. But I remember saying to him, like, that whole year of just like, I'm going to Lowell Park. And I might kiss the ground when I pull into that parking lot, 2 hours before game time.
Mhm.
Um, and it's funny, like, I didn't cry or anything, but like, when you get those chills, you feel that emotional like feeling. As I was crossing over the Bourne Bridge, I was like feeling that emotional feeling, and then pulling up to the park and just being there with just like a perma smile on my face. So I think, appreciate those summer nights. There aren't many of them, and we saw you can lose them quick. So when you're out there this summer, just realize that, in my opinion, you're seeing baseball heaven, and one of the rare things in the world, which is something that's not completely commercialized,
Mhm.
but is also of the highest quality.
Mhm.
Um, that's rare.
It is. So, last thing, you're going to be answering a couple quick questions in regards to baseball Cape stuff. So, first question is, I have to ask, where is your favorite spot on the Cape? It can be a certain ballpark, a restaurant, a beach, anything.
I'll get in trouble if I start saying parks. But I think it's Lowell Park. I think Katuitt is so unique.
Mhm.
And there's a few organizations that are like this. Chatham's really unique.
Yep.
Chatham's a first-rate organization. Uh, Chatham's with the Yankees though. Chatham gets all the love, right? Summer catch, everyone knows Chatham. I feel like, and if you say you're going to Chatham, they'll start asking you players' names from. But that's a great place. My kids love Chatham, probably the best,
Love it.
because they can go and play in the playground. I like
Exactly.
Eldridge. Eldridge is a lot of fun.
Mhm.
Orleans, I think the game day experience probably can't be beat. Um, but in terms of a special place that you just kind of pull in through a neighborhood, the whole village rallies around Katuitt. Um, I think it's less of, and this isn't, a knock on Orleans or Chatham. It's less transient, maybe.
Mhm.
So it's less of a vacation spot. It's a vacation spot, but there's people that live in Katuitt year round, and like you feel that when you're there. I just feel like the vibe at Lowell is so different from other parks, and part of it is being close with Peter and kind of watching him grow and that whole experience. But even the way the park is set up, the bricks, the
Mhm.
facade is beautiful. Um, you have this little park, and if you zoom out, you don't even realize that the ocean's like the water's right there, over the trees.
Stone
Uh,
throw.
I always think that's such a cool visual.
Mhm.
And I just think the way Coach Roberts handles his business as if it's game 7 of the World Series, whether it's game 1 or it is a championship game,
Mhm.
is admirable. And I think that um, he's almost like the New York City of the Cape League. Like if you can play for Coach Roberts and he likes you when you leave, and
Mhm.
he will sing your praises, then you can play for anybody.
You have made it.
Yeah, exactly. He
Love
kicked me off the field during batting practice last year, and I loved it.
You felt accomplished.
Like he would let me shoot video, and then like it was the playoffs. I was shooting some video of Eric Brown. And he's like, Peter, get this guy off the field, and I was totally fine with it. It's like a long lasting cake memory for me. So,
I love it.
I
All
think
right,
that's probably
question 2. If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
I think it would be to be able to stop time. Like the Zach Morris timeout.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm old enough that I know what that reference means, but I just think being able to stop time and maybe gain like 12 hours when you have to get something done would be incredible.
Not
Because I
enough
could just
time
stop time before dinner. I could get all my work done,
today.
unfreeze time, come back up in a much better mood, cook for the family, hang out with everybody. And you get so much extra free time, sleep time too. If you could freeze and then just take like a nap for 8 hours.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think everything else, there's a lot of the superpowers out there that would be great, but I think that, just from a functional standpoint, that would add so much to your life quality.
Haven't heard that one yet. You're the first one. Let's see if there's more. Question 3. What is one thing that people don't know about you? Minimal
So
people.
when I was at UMass Dartmouth, I was in a rap group for like 3 years, and
Oh.
we did songs with a couple members of the Wu-Tang Clan. We toured for a little bit. I got to open for KRS-One, Slick Rick, Atmosphere, Capadonna.
Wow.
Trying to think a couple others. So yeah.
Who knew?
I won't rap now, but
I was gonna say, can we hear some?
it's funny because like the guys from our group, Dirty are still a rap group in Providence, and they've been around for a while. They've won several awards, and then our DJ was Jennifer Lopez's tour DJ for about 6 years, and so his life is cool. He'll send us pictures from Dubai, on an infinity pool. He'll send us pictures from LA hanging out with J-Lo. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, that's one of those things I don't talk about it very often.
Hey,
But that's kind of what I was doing in college when other people were playing baseball. I was
I love it.
making music.
See, you never know. If you could spend an afternoon with any athlete in history, who would it be and why?
Um, it would probably be Tony Gwynn. Even though I'm a big power guy,
Mhm.
growing up as a kid, I was somebody who hit a lot of singles. I ran a little bit, played good defense, and Tony Gwynn was my favorite player since I was a little kid. And it was unfortunate that he died, but I feel like there's so much that you could probably learn from him. And he was also on and off the field, at least from what it sounded like. You watched some documentaries, guys that played alongside Tony. Like he was just a first-class individual. College coach at San Diego State as well, had Steven Strasburg in college, pretty good college player there. Maybe I could tell him to stop chewing tobacco and help him out, not to be self-righteous. But no,
Yeah.
I think for me, it's Tony Gwynn. I thought, Jackie Robinson would be one of my grandmothers from Brooklyn. She's one of the few people in my life. She's now deceased. She died at 100. So, she lived a long time.
Wow.
She's one of the only members of my family that like baseball. My dad is Portuguese. He loves soccer. He hates baseball. It's not his thing. I know, it's crazy. So this was like totally. So she was a Dodgers fan. It's one of the reasons that I'm a closet Dodgers fan. Is because Jackie Robinson was one that I probably would want to, but everyone says Jackie Robinson. So I'm going to say Tony Gwynn because I feel like similar qualities and just a really interesting player that we don't necessarily see in this day and age. Just a good individual too.
All right. So last question. Do you have a baseball superstition or ritual that you have to follow or something that you do before covering or attending games?
No, I had a lot of superstitions as a player in like all sports. But I hit a point where I was like 25 and I said like, I'm not that important. So nothing that I'm going to do now is going to change anything. But I'm really into preparation. So like I make sure my guns are charged. I have like 3 cameras I bring to games. I charge all that stuff the night before. I always charge my battery pack. I make sure I have gum. I make sure I have tissues. I make sure I have a towel in case it rains and you gotta clean a seat. So I think it's just like over preparation is probably what it is now.
That's good.
But when I was a player, I mean, batting gloves, tape certain places for no reason at all. Like when I was playing, I was a big hockey player and I used to put all this like tape on my socks that had no functional purpose whatsoever other than, I tuck my shirt in because Gretzky did it. Like you just do stuff like that because like you think it's cool when you're like 8 and you just don't stop doing it when you're 18. So.
Yeah, it's stuck with you forever.
Yeah, but nowadays, no, it's just mostly being prepared for games and making sure that I don't end up making myself angry at my former self.
I consider that a ritual over preparation. All right. I love it. Thanks so much, Geoff. Thanks for coming on today. It was great to have you. We wish you nothing but the best of luck with everything that you're going to be doing.
Thank you very much. I'm excited and looking forward to another great season this summer.
This is Emma Carman signing off from Cape League Codcast. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast as well as follow us on social media at official CCBL on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you for all watching and have a wonderful week.